Amir from the UK. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you guys just fine. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, yes. So go ahead with your question, please.
Let's say I was going to make a point that I think that God is the best explanation for why anything at all exists. And when I say God, I'm referring to more of a creative intelligence rather than a religious God. Just off the bat, how do you guys feel about that claim?
Well, how does it become an explanation at all?
How does it become an explanation at all, as in with the explanatory power that comes with the statement that the root cause of why anything at all exists, that's with the fact that
Well,
there is a God?
let me phrase this. Let me frame it a little bit differently. I mean, I've talked to a number of cosmologists, physicists, and so forth. Some of the leading ones, in fact, and the way that they describe this is that, I mean, you've got the first law of thermodynamics, which is that, material energy essentially cannot be created or destroyed. There was never a time in this universe in which there are things when there was no things. There was never a time when there was nothing. I mean, we're accused by creationists daily of believing that everything came from nothing, even though none of us believe that. So it's a little irritating when I hear that accusation all the time when it's something none of us believe. And it's coming from people who actually do believe in creation ex nihilo, who actually do believe that there was a point when there was just nothing. And then God said abracadabra, and then poof, there's everything. But if we have a universe in which there was always a singularity, at the beginning of cosmic inflation, the singularity already existed. And the singularity either existed before time or and in either case, there is another. I hesitate to say model, but there's some speculation that there's a former, an earlier version of the universe, kind of like a Big Bang, Big Crunch kind of oscillation, though not exactly the Big Bang, Big Crunch, because I know physicists would say, well, it's not that, but it's trivially different from that. But in a universe in which there are things and there was never no thing, then that's the explanation for why there are things, because you can't get everything from nothing. But when you want to say that when you want to say that God is an explanation of anything, then you're saying, this is how I would paraphrase this: is I don't know, therefore magic. And magic is. I think
he said creative intelligence. Did you mean God, or did you mean?
Just an overarching question, Aron. Would you identify as a scientist? Would you say that you are a scientist?
I have not published, and I think that that's going to be the determining factor there. I've done science, but I don't consider myself a scientist because I have never published for peer review.
So when you are referring to different scientific models that can give us explanations to, an eternal universe and things like eternal inflation, would you say that you are putting faith in a handful of scientists that advocate such models?
The other thing that annoys me greatly is that I object to faith as being the most dishonest position it is possible to have. And if you want to seek truth, the first thing you must do is abandon and reject faith. So I abhor being constantly accused of having faith when I don't have faith. Faith, as
there was no accusation. It was just a question.
Well, there was no accusation in the previous call.
Question.
Yeah,
I think the question, though, if somebody was to come to you and say, when you lean on the shoulders of experts in the field, are you in fact taking their word for it when you may not necessarily have the educational tool set? How would you differentiate that acceptance of, credible scientists or those who are deemed credible against taking the word of a pastor or priest? I think, how would you differentiate those two?
The difference between faith.
Sure, but the fact is that there are very diverse.
Hang on, Amir. I'd like to hear Aron address this before we lose the thread. Go ahead, brother.
See, authorities cannot be questioned. Authorities can never be disproved. If an authority says something and then the facts prove the authority wrong, then, as William Lane Craig said, if there's ever a time when science contradicts the scripture, well, then science got it wrong. The authority is always right. It doesn't matter when the evidence proves that the authority is wrong, the authority is still right. Whereas in science, it doesn't matter what your leading expert says. It doesn't matter what a consensus of experts say. They can all be disproved by a single inconvenient fact.
I'm sorry, I lost your point. What's the point that you're making there, Aron?
We don't have faith. We have a tentative trust. I mean, when my dentist tells me what's on my x-ray that I can't make out what is on my x-ray, but he tells me what this is and what we're going to have to do about it, I'm going to have to some degree, take his word for it, because I don't have, 25 years to go take dental school to challenge his expertise. I'm just going to have to take his word for it. But I'm also not going to ask my dentist what's wrong with my car, and I'm not going to ask him.
Taking your dental analogy, then, Aron, let's just say there was some procedure where you had 20 different dentists all recommending something different. At that point, what do you do? Because this has now become synonymous with these scientific models that are used to explain the root of reality. There are so many different models, and yeah, absolutely, some of the scientists that represent these particular models are very credible. However, we need to make a point that there are a plethora of different models that could be used to explain.
Are there?
Scientifically.
Can you name three?
Say string theory would be
Which
one
is
model.
Not a scientific theory, and it's not a model. It's a mathematics theory, and is irrelevant
or quantum
to what we're talking about right now.
Okay, I mean, sure, I'll grant you that maybe it's not a theory in that sense. I think it's a mathematical model, but these are all models, that are being advocated within the scientific community, or like, quantum loop, gravity, or, stuff like this. Things that are there to try to reconcile.
Wouldn't they have to be contradictory? I mean, you're going to have multiple, as you put it, multiple theories. I'm assuming that we're talking about like the catalyst for cosmic inflation. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, look, so these models about what can explain inflation, etc. There's something that still needs to precede all of it in terms of what is the mechanism that allows for something like inflation. And I think these are the deeper questions that point us to this creative intelligence that I was highlighting at the start of the call. And
all right, my topic. Let me give you this answer then, because this is, forgive me, but I hear this all the time. I can't tell you how many thousands of times that I've heard this argument. So what it comes down to is, there was a time when we thought that the movement of the planets were, because the planets had personalities. There was a time when we thought that comets were an omen, when we thought that epilepsy was demonic possession. And if we'd been satisfied, or if we'd seen thunder and lightning, we thought that these were the actions of the gods. We thought that diseases were curses, or that they were magical enchantments, bad spirits, or whatever, literally, just because they were movement of air. And if we'd been satisfied by these lies, then we never would have figured out what the real truth is. But everything that we've ever decided, I think there's a more natural answer to this. If we've turned out to be a revelation of whole new theory, whole new experiences, explanations in fields of science that were previously unimagined, and vastly more complex than the supernatural answers that we made up in our ignorance. So if we ever find a better explanation for the catalyst of the origin of cosmic inflation, it will be similarly not a god, and it'll be so far beyond a God that it'll be, again, a whole nother field of study that will render our current beliefs in gods and ghosts and that sort of thing laughably ridiculous.
Yeah, just 2 points to that. The first one is, I am sure there is some sort of mechanism that can explain inflation or can, explain the Big Bang. I'm sure that there is, but the question continues: what is the mechanism that explains why that model has, etc. And it will go on, and the options then become some sort of infinite regress or some sort of starting point, and from then on, it becomes a question of being able to choose what, out of the options of an infinite regress of explanations or a starting explanation, which one is more intellectually appealing. And out of the two, I would say that, which is a viewpoint as well that's shared by a lot of cosmologists, is that there was a starting point.
And because I don't do cosmology. I don't do cosmology. Oh, sure.
Just a second point as well is that I feel like it's a fallacy to mention, because you're absolutely, even though you're correct, I think that the utility or the way that you're using it is incorrect. You are correct that historically throughout time, people have used gods of the gaps argument, like we didn't understand something, we didn't understand illness, or whatever it is. We would just, go hashtag God. But I think that's not fair to bring that up in the deeper context of these questions when we go down to the absolute base level. Like, okay, sure, let's grant that there is some terrestrial explanation for the Big Bang. Why is there that explanation itself therefore requires answering and being brought into scrutiny?
I'm afraid I didn't understand your question. I mean, what we've got is, if you want to say that there's a God who's behind the universe, then it cannot be the same God that is behind any of the scriptures of any religion, because all of them are wrong. All of them.
I agree with that. I'm on board with that. I'm not religious.
And
I'm just the one that advocates.
God, one of the next things is how does this, what is proposed to be, I guess, a disembodied mind? How does such a thing exist when that seems to be a contradiction of its own definition? How does it do anything? Because there's what is it, telekinesis? Is it Rod Serling and it's just writing the script for how everything is supposed to exist? There's no kind of definition for God. There's no evidence for God. There's literally no reason to believe in a God, and there's a shit ton of good reasons not to.
Yeah, he's not speaking about God. He's talking about an intelligence, though. And I honestly think that's almost as pointless as a declaration, because just because we do not know what caused the Big Bang does not mean there was an intelligence, a who. It may have been a what. And so I think the correct answer is the one that science says outright and boldly: I don't know, and neither do you.
Yeah.
And, anything else is just projection or speculation. It's academic at this point.
Absolutely.
And back to, if I may, Amir, back to his dentist analogy. The difference is that if I go to the dentist and the dentist says, here's an x-ray which reveals that you have a crack in a molar and you're going to need a root canal and blah, 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 that dentist is resting his expertise on education, which rests on decades upon decades, perhaps even hundreds of years of science of dentistry, which has been tested and retested. It has been evolving and advancing. It has been proven to work time and time and time again. This isn't just something I would take on faith. These are processes that have been tested and retested in a lab and been shown to work. And the expertise of a trained dentist,
I agree. And I need to interject, because that wasn't the point of the analogy. That wasn't the point of the dentist analogy. You're missing it.
No. What I'm saying that is, I'm not taking his just his word because he's wearing a lab coat. I'm taking his word because I have done my due diligence to see that this is a trained physician,
absolutely,
specializing
that wasn't
in
the point of the analogy. The point of the analogy was to illustrate that if 20 different dentists were all giving conflicting advice, how do you go about?
No. I reject the premise of your statement. If I have a cracked, God damn it, Amir, hang on just a second. If I put 20 dentists
to say, God damn it.
If I put 20 dentists in a room and show them an x-ray of a cracked molar, I am not going to get 20 different versions of what is wrong with the molar. I simply reject your statement because that's not how the process, the science of dentistry works. It's certainly not a faith model, and it shouldn't be approached in the way that faith declarations are made. This is not an argument with to authority. We're actually relying on a process that rests on a long history of vetted, peer-reviewed, workable laboratory science.
Which can also be further confirmed by lawsuits. If the dentist says this is the way to fix this problem and he fails to fix the problem, that's going to be visited back upon him. But back to the other point, we don't in science anywhere have 20 different people with different ideas. No, we have an absolute uniform consensus. Now, as I said, I don't do cosmology. But I've seen a number of physicists all agree with each other on cosmology. They don't know if there was if the singularity is necessarily a thing, or if there was a prior time to the singularity. There's a little bit of discrepancy there because it's based on speculation, because our physics can only go so far. So the science literally can only go so far. But when we get into later sciences, especially into evolution and such, well, now we have 99.86% of all the world's collective scientists, whether they're earth scientists or life scientists, biologists, geologists, and they all uniformly agree evolution is a thing. It's a verifiable, traceable thing. And the only objections to that are less than 1% of scientists who, for reasons of prior religious indoctrination, insist on believing in their sacred folklore.
I think we should move on. I really think Amir is bringing nothing new to the conversation today. That's just my 2 cents.
Well, he was a theist, and I get that.
No. I mean, I think it's great. I get the vibe from the chat that he's a serial caller, so he calls often. Okay. Is that the case?
I'm getting that.
And I apologize for a moment. I did lose my temper. I try not to be that.
So I'm gonna go ahead and drop this call with Amir. Thank you. For making that suggestion.
Try to keep an even tone. It's just, I'm trying to make clear a point. We gave him plenty of rope. There's plenty of elbow room, plenty of oxygen. And I just don't think he was listening. But yes, humblest
we have another theist. I'm sorry, Seth. We have another theist.
No, go ahead.
Amir,
go ahead.
We're going to go ahead and drop this call. I have to make some announcements, and then we're going to pick up another call. And I appreciate that we've got 4 people waiting, and I appreciate all of your patience. Good night, Amir.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jimmy Snow, executive producer of The Line, and the rumors are true. Forrest Valkai is, in fact, a hostage in my basement. If you would like to contribute to his freedom one day, you can do so by supporting us over on Patreon or becoming a channel member. There are specific tiers for specific shows or the channel at large. You can also send us super thanks. Those are great. You can like, comment, and subscribe. Also, fudge the algorithm. Go to one of these things. The algorithm doesn't matter. It thinks it knows you better than we do. Better than you do? I know you better. Hank. There's a bunch of people named Hank. I just freaked way out. Okay, go to one of these.